I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the murder of 4 college students in Idaho. It was a murder mystery that captivated the nation and is now the highest profile trial on the court TV docket. And now new controversy surrounding DNA evidence. Here's the story. Ethan, Xana, Maddie, and Kaylee were 4 friends living together in an off-campus house at the University of Idaho. They worked hard and were all flourishing as students and having the times of their lives. They were popular, and their house was known as a gathering spot for fellow students. All of that tragically changed in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022. Those 4 students were stabbed to death inside their home. The brutal crime shook the community and touched the nation, setting off an intense manhunt for a killer. Students were afraid to be alone on campus. Some of them never came back. Investigators from the Moscow Police Department joined forces with the Idaho State Police and the FBI, following every lead, every tip, and every piece of evidence. That investigation took them across the country to Pennsylvania and led them to this man, a grad student at a neighboring university in Pullman, Washington. This accused mass killer has denied the allegations and claims to have an alibi. And now, new controversy in the case involving DNA samples from the scene. What does this evidence reveal? This is a circumstantial case. Make no mistake, there's no direct evidence. There's no confession, there's no admission. There's no eyewitness who actually saw and can identify the killer. Did not witness the killings. There is no videotape of the killings. It's going to be circumstantial evidence. So all of it has to be weighed by the jury. That's the bottom line in this case. So let's talk about some of that evidence. The suspect's attorney was speaking about evidence. We know this is a DNA-driven case. And there's some DNA that we haven't really spoken about in the course of our coverage of this case, and it came up in court. Take a listen to Ann Taylor, the attorney representing the accused killer.
What other explanation is there? The magistrate wasn't given a chance to ask that. She wasn't given a chance to ask that when she wasn't told about unknown male B, blood on the handrail. She wasn't given a chance to ask about that when she wasn't told about unknown male D, blood on a glove right outside the residence. She wasn't given a chance to ask any of those questions.
Unknown male B, unknown male D, DNA found in 2 different spots. Male DNA found in 2 different spots. Brings us to the first question in our investigation. Where was the unknown DNA found? Where specifically, and what's the significance of where the DNA is found? It's an important question. Joining me to help us through all this, he is the news director at EastIdahoNews.com. You recognize him. He's been covering this case and everything that happens out there. Nate Eaton is with us, and former homicide detective and host of the very popular The Interview Room with Chris McDonough. Of course, it's Chris McDonough. Great to see both of you. All right, so Nate, we're talking about DNA. Let's start first with the handrail. This is a handrail inside the home. We have some images here from Realtor.com, but to me that is extremely significant in trying to figure out which handrail, because this is a 3-story house.
Yeah, it's a 3-story house, and the students were murdered on the 2nd and 3rd stories of the home. So you would have to, one would imagine, if you're, killing these students, you'd have to use a handrail to try to get down or up. And remember, it's also the dark, Vinny. So it's dark inside the house. after this brutal crime is committed, it would be very possible, and it sounds like the police scrubbed everywhere for any sign of DNA, and they did find it on a handrail. Which handrail that was, they haven't said yet. Whether it was from the 3rd floor to the 2nd or the 2nd to the 1st, we don't know. But that is a significant place to find that DNA.
Yeah, Chris, I think if it's 2nd to the 3rd, to me that would be the most problematic potentially for prosecutors in this case, because 2 of the girls, Maddie, Kaylee, are murdered on that 3rd floor. You got to leave the 3rd floor, you get back to the 2nd floor, because that's where he exited and also took the lives of 2 more people. So if it is in fact that handrail, because I don't know if the suspect ever went down to that 1st floor. So if it's the handrail from 2nd to 3rd floor, extremely significant, I think.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you, Vinny. And the other question then it has to come into play is what type of blood is this? Is it transfer? Is it cast off? You know, so there's a whole other set of variances that would come into play also. So,
Nate, as we try to recall the evidence in this case, there's no, we believe that he was dressed in all black, potentially wearing gloves, but if it's unknown male DNA, it wouldn't be any of the victims in the house. The blood would have to be from someone outside of that house, right? Because inside the home, it's women that are living there, young women that are living there, and of course, Ethan would spend time there with Xana.
Right, and we don't even know when the blood was left there. I mean, it's possible that it could have been left there before those students were killed. We don't know the amount of blood that was found on the handrail, but we do know for sure that the prosecutor has said they didn't send that blood into the CODIS network, which is the FBI network where they test things. They haven't explained yet why they did not do that. Of course, this is going to be a big issue that the defense raises and already is raising about, you know, why wasn't that tested and who is that unidentified male? But you're right, we don't know the amount on the handrail and we don't know exactly who it belongs to. Could it have been a friend who was visiting a few nights before who, you know, maybe got a bloody nose or, you know, cut their hand while they were cooking? I mean, you could imagine any sort of circumstance where someone might have bled, it got on the rail, and it could potentially have nothing to do with the crime, or it could tie directly to what we're talking about.
Now, Chris McDonough, let's talk about a glove. Because you found a glove there, right? You were there a few days after all of this and spotted this glove, which was on the property of the home. I think we have another image where you can kind of circle it, or an arrow so we can see where it is. On the other side of the crime scene tape, tell us the story behind the glove that you found.
Yeah, so that was actually Thanksgiving Day, Vinny, and I was standing, as you can see, on the other side of the barrier tape there, and I looked behind the trash can, and there's that glove sitting right there in that debris. The interesting thing about it is I went back, also looked at some of the earlier news reports, you know, a few days after the crime had occurred, and you can't tell for sure, but there is some footage that appears to show that glove also in that same position. And what I did is I called the on-scene officer over, pointed it out to him, and they subsequently collected it.
Now, when you looked at that glove, and obviously crime scene collected it, but from where you were you able to tell if there was any blood or anything on that glove?
No, unfortunately, you couldn't tell from where I was standing. I couldn't see anything.
Let me ask you, Nate Eaton, do we know if it's this glove that Chris McDonough found, or if there's a second glove involved here?
We don't know. They haven't specified which glove it is. Very well could be that glove, could be another glove. You know, it was wintertime when these students were killed. It was quite cold. So we don't know exactly which glove it was or the specific location of where that glove was found.
Now, so Chris, just to give a little more perspective on where the glove that you spotted was found, how would you describe that area relative to the house and relative to how you would get in and out of the house?
So if the theory is that the suspect may have been parked out in front of the house, then if the suspect had come out of that house, it's about 30 feet from the front door going towards the street. And at the time the trash cans were out, so it would be in the direction of travel if that was the theory of where a subject would have been coming from. But again, like Nate said, you know, I don't know if that is the glove that's in reference here, but it certainly did not stick into the environment itself. It stuck out pretty clearly to me as you know, a former homicide guy.
And obviously there's snow on the ground, and I'm trying to remember, Nate, do we know when it snowed? I know it snows all the time in Idaho that time of year, but do we have any idea of when it snowed and whether this would be consistent with having been left there at the time of the murder?
I don't recall the specific weather that night, Vinny, or the next few days. I do know, though, that this was very fresh video that you're showing, that glove, you know, that Chris took the photo of, and there was a bit of snow there. So it wasn't heavy snow. It's not like you had 1 or 2 feet of snow, which is sometimes possible at this time of year. So it looks like, you know, that's just a quarter of an inch of that. But when that snow fell on top of the glove, I don't recall the specific weather forecast.
All right, Nate and Chris are going to help us out throughout the program. Coming up next, how will the unknown DNA impact the trial?
Is there another explanation here? I've got this sheath, but there are all these other things that if I know about them, matter. What's the other explanation? What's going on with this investigation?
The victim had been brutally stabbed multiple times.
A single mother found dead. An unsettling crime scene.
With rose petals scattered around her.
The suspect, a classically trained concert pianist.
Now a jury must decide, did this musician
commit murder?
I think there's meaning and significance to everything a killer does.
The Rose Petal Murder Trial, weekday mornings, only on Court TV.
I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because you brought up blood DNA of an unknown individual that was found, I think, on the handrail.
Yes.
Doesn't that necessarily not exclude Mr. Kohberger? What it may do is suggest there might be a potential other person in addition involved if you assume that that blood was related to the victims and not some earlier event in the house.
If what the court is saying is exactly why the magistrate needed to know that. Is there another explanation here? I've got this sheath, but there are all these other things that if I know about them, matter. What's the other explanation? What's going on with this investigation? What's happening here?
So that's Ann Taylor, who is bringing up the unknown DNA at the scene of this quadruple murder. Blood on a rail inside the home, and then blood on a glove found outside of the home. Now, what we do know is that the knife sheath on the little snap, that's where the suspect's DNA allegedly is. Key part of the prosecution case. But now you've got 2 samples of unknown male DNA that hasn't been tested. They haven't figured out whose it is. So here's the question. We know pre-trial they're trying to use this to exclude evidence, but the next question in our investigation, probably even more significant, because I don't think that evidence is going to be eliminated. How will the unknown DNA impact the trial? Right? How is that going to play? How will it impact the jury, the defense, the arguments, the prosecution, everything else? Still with me, Nate Eaton, and joining me, you know him, folks, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, led the high-profile, successful defense of George Zimmerman. And that's just the tip of the iceberg with the people that he's represented successfully. Mark O'Mara is with us. Mark, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Let me ask you this, Mark, off the top, like how 0 to 10 for this defendant, how big is the evidence that there are 2 samples of unknown male DNA, one outside, one inside a home that is occupied primarily, almost exclusively by women who live there? You know, sometimes a guy may stay there or visit.
Oh, it's probably a good 7. And the reason why is we can never forget that a criminal trial is nothing other than a question of whether or not the state has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt to each and every one of those jurors. So that's the standard that we start with. And then in a case where there's just circumstantial evidence, Vinnie, as you said earlier, this is a circumstantial evidence case. It's a unique term. What that means under the law is that when there's not direct evidence, but it's circumstantial, then the state's presentation has to exclude every reasonable hypothesis of innocence. That's sort of the way we look at it. And when you look at that context, now we have, Vinnie, I know you've done before and I've done before, what we call the Soddy defense, S-O-D-D-I. Some other dude did it. And when you throw all of that into this mix, it's going to be very significant because the defense doesn't need to show anything other than the state has not proven the case properly to their jury. And this evidence is very significant because it shows an unknown. We know reasonable doubt can come from the evidence itself, lack of evidence or conflict in the evidence, and now we've thrown into the mix 2 other guys potentially who probably are not Bryan Kohberger.
Now, let me ask you, Nate, there's been no testing at all of this unknown DNA?
Yeah, the prosecutors, well, no CODIS testing. They haven't sent it to the FBI lab. Whether they've done other sort of testing, we're unaware of. We do know that they sent that knife sheath, the thing, you know, you were just holding up, and that is how they were able to track down Bryan Kohberger. And the defense is going to make a big deal that, 1, it hasn't been tested, but 2, they're also arguing that that evidence of the unknown males, that was never brought to the attention of the original magistrate judge who issued the arrest warrant. So they're saying because the judge did not have that information, Bryan Kohberger should not have been arrested. There could have been other potential suspects out there. An attorney here in Idaho said they're going to really nail this and, quote, muddy the waters. That's how they're describing it, to make it clear that everyone thinks it might be Kohberger because of that knife sheath, but what about these other guys, and what about this evidence that hasn't been tested?
All right, Mark O'Mara, let me ask you this. They are claiming that he's innocent in court. Would you test it yourself? Find out whether it's through CODIS or through genetic genealogy. Would you take those samples and do anything and everything you could to track down whose DNA it is from the defense side here?
Well, first of all, we do not have any obligation like that. I don't like the idea of doing any of the states' work for them, but let's face it, it is now an issue. I think it's incumbent upon the state to go now find out who that is, whoever.
What if they don't? What if they don't? Would you say, well, they're not going to do it? Well, then I'll do it, Your Honor. Would you?
Yeah, it's a little arrogant. You have to be careful playing outside what you need to do, you know, coloring outside the lines a little bit. But yes, if there's evidence out there, absolutely. Because here's the thing. We know that they have Kohberger's evidence of the DNA on one thing. If there are 2 other people out there or 1 other person out there, they call them unknown B and D, that indicates to me that they've decided it's not the same blood sampling. Don't know how that's happened yet, but it seems to be that way, potentially. Yeah, I might take that shot. Now, don't forget, you get an opportunity as the defense to maybe get a part of that DNA and do it somewhat under the defense protection, right? That work product. I don't see it happening that way, but I cannot imagine the government going to trial in this case without having done everything that they could possibly do to get those blood splatters or blood tests done.
And looking at where it was found in this case, a glove and on a railing, how significant is that? And do you think the defense will tell a story based upon where it's found and how it's found.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if we have a glove and it has blood that is not Kohberger's, that's extraordinarily significant, because part of the reason why there's not a whole bunch of other evidence there is the argument that somebody was using a glove, somebody was protecting their own DNA from being found. So blood that is not Kohberger's on a glove, I think, is extraordinarily significant. That would go from a 7 to a 9 at least. And the handrail is somewhat significant. Again, whichever one it might be, it is suggestive that somebody was bleeding, at least a little bit, going up there. And if it's not Kohberger, then the question again remains, who is it? Because if it's not Kohberger, then there's somebody else who maybe should be charged in this case besides him.
And Nate, the defendant here, not only saying not guilty, claiming his innocence, I think they've used that word, not just not guilty, but innocence, has an alibi, or has claimed an alibi for that night.
Yeah, he says he was out looking at the stars, that he wasn't anywhere near the crime scene. His cell phone was off. There was no tracking. But remember, Vinnie, the next day it was turned back on, and it did track near the home where this happened. And going back to the point with the glove and the DNA and whatnot, I just wonder if the prosecution is going to continually nail the fact that that sheath was found under Maddie's body and comfort her there on her bed, and that it did link to to Bryan Kohberger. I mean, that's pretty strong, I would imagine.
That is, to me, that is the absolute foundation of this case, and it might be tough without it. Nate's going to stay with us. Mark O'Mara, great to see you. Thank you so much. I know your time's valuable. We appreciate it. Up next, whose DNA is it? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the murder of 4 University of Idaho students. It's a circumstantial case that includes some very compelling evidence, but the defendant is still proclaiming his innocence, and it is set to be a huge trial right here on Court TV. Here's the story. 4 students were brutally murdered in their home near the University of Idaho. Kaylee, Maddie, Ethan, and Xana were great people with amazing futures that were taken away by a monster. The man accused of this horrific crime has denied doing it and has proclaimed his innocence. There is no eyewitness, no confession, and no direct evidence. It's a prosecution built on circumstantial evidence, which prosecutors believe is compelling, including DNA on a knife sheath found at the scene of the crime. But it's not the only DNA that's been recovered, as there is other DNA from unknown males found near the scene. DNA, big part of this case, the foundation of the prosecution, but could be very important for the defense when you talk about this unknown male DNA. Let's take a listen to the accused's attorney, Ann Taylor, and the judge talking about this evidence.
As to Mr. Kohberger, now, there may be, as you say, other people that creates concern or issues about that need to be investigated further, but I'm not sure that that diminishes the probable cause as to Mr. Kohberger if his DNA is found on a knife sheath found on or near the victim who was stabbed with said alleged knife that would have been in said alleged sheath.
I think the most prominent question is, how did that sheath get there? And I think when you ask that question, I think you can have DNA on an object at a scene when you know about all of these other things and you don't find probable cause, because there are more questions than there are answers. And all of a sudden, this one thing doesn't look as big. It doesn't look as everything pointing to it when you have the context around it. The magistrate didn't have to have every detail of the case, but knowing how many attempts to find a DNA connection there were, and it didn't exist in Bryan's car, in Bryan's apartment, that there's no other DNA in there other than an unknown male B that we know of for sure, an unknown male D outside.
Okay, so these arguments are by the defense in an attempt pre-trial to get something done, to get charges dismissed, to get evidence excluded. It's not going to happen, okay? Let me clue you in. It's not going to happen in this case. The knife sheath, the DNA found on the snap, it's all going to be admitted. Now, don't forget the story behind this DNA, which has also been litigated. They ran the DNA through CODIS. Didn't get any hits because the suspect who was arrested, the defendant, had no prior arrests. His DNA was not in the system. So then they went to genetic genealogy. And through that, plus putting it together with the other pieces here, we're able to zero in on the defendant and ended up getting his DNA. And his DNA, once they swabbed him after arresting him, then matched here. But what about the other DNA? What about it? Brings us to the next question in our investigation. Whose DNA is it? Whose could it be? What do you need to know? How do you figure it out? Joining me, news director at EastIdahoNews.com. Been covering this case since the beginning. Nate Eaton is with us, and the laboratory director for Pure Gold Forensics. She has more than 20 years of experience in DNA analysis, forensic DNA expert, Susanna Ryan. Okay, Susanna, I'm going to start with you on this. 2 samples, apparently they're both blood, one from a handrail, one from a glove, handrail inside, the glove outside of the home. What are you going to do? How are you going to extract it? How are you going to test it? What is the process for taking those samples and trying to figure out who they belong to?
Well, we're getting a profile. So we know that there's a profile, 2 unknown male profiles. So that means there was enough DNA. They're able to get a profile. Then the next step is trying to compare that profile to, first, you'd want to compare it to anyone in the house, anyone that had known access to the house, and see if that person can be included or excluded. And actually, it seems that at that point, that's where this sort of investigation into whose DNA is that, it stopped, right? Because they've already stated that these profiles were not entered into CODIS. So they were deemed ineligible for CODIS for, I'm not sure what reason, but they're not being put into CODIS. And
what are the reasons? Are there reasons based on what the sample is and the information you got from the sample that would prevent you from checking with CODIS? Or do you think it's more of just an investigatory decision because they have DNA from the knife sheath?
I think it could be a little bit of both. So the FBI controls the CODIS database. They maintain the database, and they have some very strict rules about what sort of profile is eligible for upload. So, for example, we don't ever want to inadvertently upload a victim's DNA profile. We don't want to upload what we would call an elimination sample, so someone else that had legitimate access to that home. So it is possible that because this house was, it sounds pretty kind of open. Lots of people in and out, and maybe they're not entirely sure that these bloodstains are associated with the crime. So they're deeming them, for that reason, ineligible for upload. However, I find this a little bit problematic because, we had an unknown male profile on the knife sheath. And so, yes, that's obviously associated with a weapon and definitely going to be eligible for upload. But if we didn't have that, I can guarantee you that these unknown male profiles would be considered eligible for upload and searched. And so it is surprising to me that they're not at least taking that one additional step let's put it into CODIS and see if it matches. Because now you have this big question of, well, whose DNA is this?
Yeah, I don't like unanswered questions. I'm a former prosecutor. Nate, Susanna was talking about what was going on in the house. Let's take a look at this. Some of the TikTok videos give us an idea of some of the activity inside the home.
Only when I ain't in bed on my own, and I wake up and I see your name on my phone.
City talking, we taking notes. Tell him all to keep making posts. Wish he could, but he can't get close. OG so proud of me.
Murphy, you've been a bad boy.
Did anybody do their chores today?
And disappear right after the song. So give me the night to show you and hold you.
And here, another one of the videos you can see, people over the house, some sort of a social event, a party. Nate, from your reporting, I mean, it's a typical college house, right? There's a lot of people coming in and out, and I would presume parties.
All the time, Vinny, all the time. I mean, how many college kids get home from class and they walk into their home and they don't know who a person is there because they're there to see another roommate. And this was a weekend and things were busy. So you could imagine it really could have been anybody. Someone could have gone up to that third floor and had a hangnail that maybe was bleeding a little bit and it got on the handrail. And somebody could have been wearing a glove outside if it was a cold winter night and, even had, chafed skin that was bleeding a little bit and it got on the glove. So really what Susanna was saying, I think is interesting. The fact that I would imagine you would want to get those items tested just to rule out people that you could, or to try to figure out who they belonged to. And maybe the prosecution, has a theory as to why they didn't do it, or they have some other sort of testing that they had planned down the line, whatever it is. That is the big question. But yeah, it's a college house. It's a fun time. People are coming and going, a lot of people in and out. It could really be any guy that visited the home.
Absolutely. Susanna, Ryan, thank you so much. Always appreciate your insight. Nate's going to stay with us. Still to come, does the case against the suspected killer rely solely on the DNA?
When there's a DNA match between the DNA in the sheath and Mr. Kohberger, isn't that probable cause every day and twice on Sunday?
When you go into a trial, you try to eliminate surprises.
Did he ever use the N-word?
Yes, he did.
That was a surprise.
The goal was to get him to lie.
Have you used that word?
Not that I recall, no.
Anywhere that he was involved was tarnished.
I was heard uttering the N-word 40 times. How do you pull that back? You don't.
Trial and Error. Why did O.J. win? A Court TV original series. New episode Sunday night, 8 Eastern and Pacific. Only on Court TV.
Preclude a finding of probable cause when there's a DNA match between the DNA in the sheath and Mr. Kohberger. Isn't that probable cause every day and twice on Sunday?
Not in this context. Not in this context, because of the IgG work, because that's the ultimate question that will be before a jury. What does that mean, right? What does a knife sheath at a scene mean? That's going to be the ultimate question. You're
killed by a knife? That probably means a lot.
It might.
It means a lot. It really means a lot, especially the IgG, the investigative genetic genealogy that was done from the DNA that was gotten from this snap on the knife sheath. Like, this is so significant. If this thing is not at the scene, if that knife sheath is not at the scene, I don't know what happens here. And that brings us to the next question in our investigation. Does the case against the accused killer rely solely on the DNA? Is that the whole case? Still with you, Nate Eaton, and joining me, former homicide detective, host of the Interview Room with Chris McDonough. It's Chris McDonough. All right, I want to show you guys this first because I think we need to establish this part of it. Gray Hughes from YouTube, Gray Hughes Investigates, on the show and talking about another piece of evidence in this case. Let's take a look.
Now look what time it is, 4:07 and 41 seconds or so. I think he parked at 4:08, all right? And then at 4:08, probably exits the vehicle sometime after that, and then at 4:20 it leaves at a high rate of speed. But interestingly, in between 4:08 and 4:20, a knife sheath was left inside the house on Madison Mogan's bed that contained the DNA of Bryan Kohberger, who also drives a 2015 white Elantra.
So let's talk about it. When we were all covering this story when it first broke, and there was a search for a killer, it was all about the white Elantra, Nate. And we had no idea that this IgG was being used. We had no idea about the DNA at the time. It was all about, does anyone recognize this car? Does anyone know about this white Elantra? And we figured that was the key to solving the case, figure out who drives the Elantra. So how significant do you think, Nate, the Elantra is in this case versus the DNA on the knife sheath?
Well, I don't know if one will be more significant than the other. You would think that the DNA would, but that white Elantra did play a big part. I remember when the police released those videos and they were asking people to call for help. Anybody driving a white Elantra was on alert, worried that they could be called in. We don't know what other things they have, Vinny. I mean, there will be things that come out of this trial that will shock us, evidence that hasn't been presented, as it happens in every trial. We know bits and pieces. Prosecutors don't like to lay out their entire case before the trial happens, but I would imagine that a significant portion will rely on that sheath, that knife sheath that was found there, especially the location of it. It wasn't like found outside the house. It wasn't down the street. It wasn't in the kitchen. It was on Maddie's bed, the bed where she was killed. And it was the sheath that would house, as the judge said, the knife. Pretty significant if you're stabbed to death. So I think it will be significant, but I think there's a lot of other evidence that we don't even know about tonight that will come into play.
Chris McDonough, do you think there would even have been an arrest without that DNA? Do you think they could have caught him?
Vinny, I think they were on the trail of Kohberger at the time, obviously with, who had a white Elantra in the area, in the environment. And then, of course, you start playing into the digital footprint and the phone pings and the CAS team from the FBI getting involved. There's technology today. One of the technologies that a lot of people are not aware of, it's called Gladiator. And it's an FBI technology that you can actually put a phone really right where you need it to be if that individual was in that circle. And I think we get a clue as to how much evidence they may have by the fact that the prosecution has presented, 25 experts. They've revealed 25 experts, and the defense is challenging 22 of them. So that's going to tell us a whole bunch. I mean, you know that more than anybody in your experience.
Now, there's also a quasi-witness, I would say, not someone who saw the actual murders, but someone who we believe saw the killer, one of the roommates who survived all of this. This is from the probable cause affidavit. DM, that's the roommate, stated she opened her door for the third time after she heard the crying and saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. DM described the figure as 5'10" or taller, male, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. Now, that seems significant, but I want you to take a listen to Ann Taylor talk about that witness.
Remember, the issue was whether or not one of the victims ran downstairs, and she didn't say it once. She said it 4 times in a row in the very first interview, and that just didn't happen. It just couldn't have happened. And that was not told. In fact, that statement was brushed over and withheld from the magistrate. About the memory issues, in the second interview the same day, there are 2 references to not remembering. A couple of days later, there's the third interview, and there's references to not remembering, being drunk, a statement, I don't know any of it. Like half this stuff, I don't know if it's a dream or if it's real. That's at page 399. At page 406, I don't know if this was real or in my mind was just like playing with me. But from what I think I heard, someone was crying in the bathroom.
The simple answer is investigators knew what she saw was real. And we know it wasn't a dream because they found the evidence discovered the next morning. That general description, which is what was provided in the PC affidavit, was consistent throughout all of her interviews. She described seeing someone wearing all black, a mask with only a portion of their face showing and visible. This person was male, white. She heard a voice that was not something that she recognized. The person was a slim, skinny, lean build. And the person was taller than she is around 5'8".
Nate Eaton, one thing that the prosecutor doesn't mention there, which all of us jumped on, was the description of the eyebrows. Like that was, to me, that was a big part, you know, because his face was covered, whoever it was, but the eyebrows at one point at least were described in the affidavit as bushy eyebrows. How significant, how important do you think the roommate's testimony will be?
Oh, it's going to be huge. It's going to be huge. And think of people that have been through trauma. For the defense to say, oh, she changed her story, she doesn't remember this or that or whatever. Well, a traumatic, horrific event has just happened. She could have been scared for her life. Of course, she's not going to remember every single detail. That will be the witness that will answer a lot of questions, we hope, we think. But also, Vinnie, there's other witnesses we don't even know about. Are there people who saw Kohberger that night, you know, at a gas station or at a grocery store or whatever that we don't know about, that they're going to call to the stand, that won't talk at all about DNA, but will talk about what they observed that evening when they saw him? That is a possibility that we could see. So the roommate testimony going to be huge. And we haven't heard from her. She has not spoken publicly to anybody.
Yeah. Chris, do you agree?
Yeah, I think the impact is also she's going to put one person in that house.
That is extremely significant, right? If you talk about 2 samples of unknown DNA, we've been talking about that. There's only one person that she sees. That could be absolutely huge as well. Big thank you, Nate Eaton, EastIdahoNews.com. Great to see you. Thanks so much. Chris McDonough, The Interview Room on YouTube. Make sure you download and check it out. Okay, unknown DNA at a crime scene it's not great for prosecutors. The jury likes answers. But the state believes their DNA on that knife sheath tells the whole story. Now, if that defendant is actually factually innocent, then I believe he should use genetic genealogy to figure out whose DNA it is. You know, the defense is allowed to investigate a case as well, unless they don't want to really know the answer. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for the answers as the investigation continues.